Welcome back to the Intuition Incubator. Today, I'm super excited to be interviewing Richelle Fredson. Richelle Fredson is a book publishing coach and consultant working with aspiring and published authors to create impactful book concepts and competitive book proposals. Many of Richelle's clients go on to receive impressive offers from their dream publishers. Her recent clients include Fornoosh Torabi, Chrissy King, Sade Zarai, Vanessa Marin, and many more. Richelle has launched over 1,400 books in her career and is a launch strategist for many best selling authors and thought leaders. Formerly, she was the director of publicity and book marketing for Hay House and also serving in acquisitions. She's the host of the Forbes feature podcast, Bound and Determined, which I love, where she interviews industry experts and authors. And she's also the founder of the Book Proposal Blueprint program, which I also loved. Welcome, Richelle.
What an introduction. Thank you for having me, Abby.
Oh, I'm super excited to have you. One of the things that I really just cherished and loved about the Blueprint program was your authenticity and your just so down to earthness and the vast array of authors you've worked with and writers that you've worked with and that process, which I feel has so much intuition in it and so much fear
Yeah,
at the same time, right? So
absolutely.
everything that I kind of talk about and all of my guests talk about to varying levels. So I'm really happy to have you and kind of hear some of your journey and what you've experienced in your work life.
Yeah, I mean, fear is definitely fear and vulnerability, right? I think in any creative pursuit, you're putting a part of your heart and soul out into the world unchaperoned, right? And you get feedback and you get, customers and buyers who are, integrating all the words and all the art that you've created. And it can be so scary to open yourself up to opinion. So I think writers, especially, um, can use that vulnerability, right? And that's something that I discovered over a long period of time with working with a lot of folks writing a lot of different things. That it always came down to how can I use the emotions and the fear that I have about this process to actually connect with people, to use it as a way to reveal more about myself as a connection point to the people on the other end. And I think when people think about books, they don't necessarily think of it as a community building tool, but it really is, right? You are building trust with someone you may never meet, who you are asking to take your advice or, read your stories or be with you on a journey. And so there is this sort of shared vulnerability between you and the person on the other end. So I don't think it matters what we're creating. I think there's always going to be that bit of like, oh my gosh, like how will people receive this? Or will they think that this is stupid? Or should I not have done it at all? And I think that that just means you're doing something new and you're probably doing something worthy. So I hope it doesn't stop people from taking action.
Yeah. And there's so many metaphors just leaping out to me as you're talking. And I know that, we're talking about writing, but one of the things that I've heard you say often, and you'll have to finish the sentence for me, you you write it for you, but it's not for you. It's
It's about you, but it's not for you.
okay, that's it.
Yep,
It's
yep, yep,
about
yep.
you, but it's not for you. And the reason, of course, is, or one of the many reasons I'm sure, is because you have no control. And I know this firsthand from my blog. What you put something down, you don't know what someone's picking up.
Yeah, yeah,
And from my work and the way that the human brain works and the projections and all of those kinds of things, we put something into the world and it is perceived and received through the lens, normally the fear-based lens, the survival, animal-based lens of the other person. And that's true of writing, but man, isn't that true in life?
yeah. And I think too, for creatives, especially writers, there's so much of our story in what we're making. So it doesn't matter how prescriptive a book is. I mean, I've done books in finance and health and mental health and everything in between. But you still are getting a really big chunk of who this author is, their story, why they're passionate about it, their personal experiences that bring depth to a book. So there's this component of I need to bring myself to the work, but at the end of the day, I'm not the only buyer. So how do I make my story mean something to somebody else? And that's hard to do alone. This is the whole reason why I do the work that I do, is that when you're in a silo creating, you're only writing what you know. But to have another opinion or thought partnership say, hey, I might angle it this way, or I might, say a little bit more here or a little bit less here so that the reader feels seen in your experiences. So it's always layered, right? You want the creative process and the writing process to be really fulfilling for you and to scratch that creative itch and to honor your experiences. But your book is for everybody else. So, how do we get outside of ourselves in order to make sure that we're appealing to the right readers and helping them feel seen within those pages?
Yeah, and I'm speaking to the listeners who maybe aren't writers, but can learn so much from this metaphor because, listen, we live our lives for ourselves. It's our experience that we're having, but we want to have deep connection with other people,
Yep.
right? I.e., in this narrative, the reader, And so I always talk about, the whole problem that codependency is trying to solve is how do I be me when I'm with you?
Yeah.
And it's a really a great metaphor because a lot of times people are writing about very deep and personal things, like you said. And, how do I honor my truth, that deep inner intuitive knowing that is just my experience. It doesn't have to be what happened as in the law,
Hmm.
but it was my experience of what happens. And I've heard a lot of memoirists write about, like, hey, this is I'm not saying that this is memory is not very um reliable,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's the emotional experience,
That's
right?
right.
That people are relating to. And when we bring ourselves to a book or to a conversation or whatever, that vulnerable self,
Yeah.
that's what provides connection.
I mean, as a consumer of anything, whether you're taking a program in someone's business or you're reading their blog or you're looking at their Instagram or whatever it is that you're consuming, the ultimate connection point is when you go, "Oh, me too. Me too."
Good.
Right? Like where you see someone acknowledge maybe the things that aren't as glamorous, like the real life stuff, the real life experiences that we know that everyone will experience at some point, and you get the opportunity to go, "Oh, me too." But those me too moments only come when the person who is giving is being fully themselves. Because you can sniff out when someone's being
Yeah.
phony. You can sniff out when someone is trying to model something else that's already out there.
Right.
So when we get to be fully ourselves, no matter what we're doing, we get the opportunity to really build connection, like real, just yummy, delicious connection with other people.
You know, this is really interesting. I'm gonna asking you to kind of go maybe off topic a little bit, but what you're saying is really because I just lead these very intuitively, and kind of go where the spirit takes me.
Yeah.
But one of the very, I mean, it's bizarre, really. I think that something happened last night that I was speaking with someone, and this term came out, which was, and we had neither of us had really thought about it that way, but the vulnerability of giving. And in this situation, it was talking about like caregiving, and this person was saying, I almost feel like like this other person would be taking care of me much differently. And I almost get a fear when I think of just showing up and taking care of this person. And most often we think of giving as not vulnerable, right? Like
Mm,
it's easier to give than it is to receive. Like we all say that all the time.
yeah.
But what you're pointing to here, and I find that it's just an interesting synchronicity, is that there's a lot of vulnerability in giving.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, again, I think anytime we're putting something that is precious to us or comes from our mind, body, spirit, anything that feels very sacred to us out into the world, you are risking one of the most treasured thing, which is belonging, right? And that's like the most innate need that we have as humans is to belong somewhere. And so that risk of putting yourself out there is putting that belonging at risk. But I've been through this a number of times in my own evolution from, even making friends when I was younger to jobs that I took to this business that I started. When I
Yeah.
first started this business, after leaving corporate for 15 years and working inside of a publisher, I was so used to being behind the scenes and supporting everybody else in their endeavors that to be in front was deeply uncomfortable. So much so that I created sort of a flashy business name. My website didn't really have me on it. There was like one little photo on my about page, but it was still really disconnected because I wasn't feeling ready to show up in that capacity yet. It felt scary. A friend of mine came along who's a brilliant marketing and branding gal, and she said, basically, like, what the heck are you doing? Like, the way that you get people to trust you and bring in clients that feel aligned for you is by showing them who you are. So we put my website and my business through a whole different iteration and had pictures of me and my son, and I talked about what my husband and I love to do, and it became personal. I think that's
Mm.
another place where there's just so much growth opportunity is that people think that their business and their personal life need to sit in two separate silos. For me, whenever I've really brought those two things together and just showed people all the different elements and components to who I am, the results are so much better. So, in the early days of my business, I would get clients because on Instagram, I was showing them what I was making for dinner, what I was doing with my kid that weekend, funny stuff, dropping my toothbrush in the toilet on a Monday morning. Well, this is how it goes, guys. Those moments became me too connection point moments of someone going, I'm not the only one having a crappy day, or I'm not the only one who finds time in the kitchen to be therapy. And we began having conversations that led to clients. And so, again, it's just another point of being open and being vulnerable and showing people who you are on every different layer can really bring a lot of goodness between you and other people.
And I think the fear is that if people see the hot mess,
Yeah.
they're not gonna think I know what I'm doing.
I remember
Eh
my dad going, "Oh my god, I can't believe you're posting
Yeah,
that on Instagram. Like,
yeah,
no one's gonna wanna work with you," because I was talking about a particularly stressful day. And, I took a picture of, like, kind of my head propped up on the keyboard, like, "Oh my god, guys, like, it was a real
yeah.
shit storm out there today." And he goes, "No one's going to think that you are capable of." I go, "No, dad, like, people don't want just the glossy. And me having a hard day doesn't mean I'm any less capable or professional or, you know, you have the know-how to support someone through their process. It just means I'm human. And I think the world can do with more of that."
Yeah, exactly. I remember putting a picture up on Facebook once when I was trying to write, and it was like, "This is my creative process," and it was me stuffing chips in my mouth.
The more crumbs in the keyboard, the better.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But
That's
talk
true.
about that, yeah, I've actually heard you say that on one of your podcasts that you didn't use your name because you were still afraid to be seen, which I think is such an interesting concept because for me, the journey has been, and I think it's probably, you'll probably tell me it's probably for a lot of writers because I would think so. Um, it's a combination. It's afraid to be seen, but afraid not to be seen. It's like I've been trying to birth a book for years. And one of the things I think that gets in my way is a lack of clarity, which I think that comes from fear. Like this is a big area for me this next year of the next iteration of where I'm tackling this. And but yet it doesn't go away. Like the desire to do that. And I bet you experience this with a lot of authors. And I know it's your passion. Like, don't keep this story inside you if you have this, And when you can't let it go away, you know what I mean? It's you can't crush the dream. Like, that's your intuition. That's your inner world, like popping through saying, hey, there's something here. And so it's this dichotomy, right? Between afraid to be seen, but afraid never to be seen, because
Yeah.
that's the other primal drive to matter, to have some
Yeah.
meaning in this life.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a few things that I would touch on there. One is that in my experience, I have found that writers and all creatives really, and I say creatives because writers aren't just writers. Writers are doing a lot of other things that require putting themselves out there, right? And the journey from creative to salesperson, which is a hump that has to be crossed for everybody, is not easy or innate. But I think the biggest misconception is that clarity or readiness is going to be like a lightning bolt that just comes down out of the sky and
Mm.
hits you. That's not it for most people. It's an active decision to keep moving forward. So it's like taking action brings the clarity because you have to sift through the sand of all the ideas to hit the gem. The gem doesn't just drop out of the sky and hit you on the head. You may have moments that feel like an epiphany or an aha, and those are great. Those are the breadcrumbs that are leading you to the idea, but they often come through taking action. And so a lot of writers that I talk to are like, I'm waiting till I feel ready, or I'm waiting till I have the right idea. And the right idea comes from going through all the crappy ideas until you hit the right one. And so it's constantly unearthing, all the garbage until you hit the right idea. And you've heard me say a million times in Blueprint and on my podcast that there's no wasted time. Surrender the timeline for getting to the right idea, because that's the biggest gift we can give ourselves, is the time to work it all out and test it and talk about it and see what people say. If it's not for us, it's for other people. Like, getting that social proof and getting that feedback on the stages of your idea is really helpful. So I think that's it. It's like, we all want clarity, we all want belonging, we all want acceptance, but we can't get anywhere if we don't first take action.
Yeah, and so what do you say, because here's what fear does, right? Fear you can be taking action, taking action, taking action, and the way that the mind works, right? The analytical mind, the left brain, around and around and around. And so let's say you have these moments of clarity. You have these ideas, they're landing like, "Oh yeah, this is so good." And they have those so many of those, right? And then before you know it, you're like, nah, this isn't it. Or you have another idea and you're like, oh my God, this is so good, but this doesn't go with this and da 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 da. And you're back in this loop, this looping, which is really how we heal. We have to loop and loop and loop to get to the bottom. But it's like, you know, what do you say? How do you know intuitively when this is the one that I have to keep pushing through, or intuitively, no, that wasn't the one. It's this one. It's this one.
Yeah.
It's this one. Like
Yeah.
how do you know?
Well, I think this happens to us because we're constantly in a state of evolution. So, what lights us up and feels meaningful in one moment is going to be different in the next. And so, it's not unusual for people who are working on something creative to have these sort of multiple ideas playing around at the same time. But this is where I would actually step out of intuition and into strategy. And it's not to say we have to like leave the intuition behind. We want to feel good about what we're creating, but there is also a strategy in what we bring out into the world first. And that's like, if you're trying to grow a business, or if you're trying to, in the case of my clients, get a publishing deal, or you want to use a book as a tool to get more clients, whatever it is, there's a strategy in what you bring to market first, right? You've heard me talk about that
Mhm.
cornerstone idea, right? So if the intention is business building, or the intention is a big publishing deal, there's a strategy in what book you bring out first or what project you bring out first. If it's just for the sake of creativity and putting something out in the world because you feel called to do it, which is also worthy and wonderful, you can take more liberties about what that idea is. It should be the one that you feel ready to sink into for the next couple years, right? Because it takes a while to work on these things. So, it's part intuition, but also part strategy, depending on what it is that you're trying to bring to life and why.
And so, how do you support people who feel stuck? Because I'm sure you see that a lot in writing.
Yeah. I mean, there's technique and then there's also just conversation. And so, speaking of intuition, I've been doing this for a long time. I've worn so many hats in publishing. I've worked with authors at a lot of different stages and witnessed their own evolution and been sort of a cheerleader and a coach for them for many years. So, I get these intuitive hits of what is the right idea and the right timing based on what
Mm.
their end goal is. So I can bridge that gap, but it's also just from doing it so many times. So I'm like, is it skill? It's both learned skill and also it's a little intuitive because I can hear someone talk to me and I'll go, "Oh, that's it. That's it. Like that's the idea. And I feel it in my bones, but
Mm.
it has to align with where they want to be. So my idea doesn't always win out because I think that that's the best sort of professional industry driven idea that's going to bring them success. Sometimes it's like their heart is somewhere else and that project needs to birth first to make room for the big moneymaker project. So, it really is just getting personal and intimate with people. It really is such an intimate process. And this is why I always say, like, don't do it alone. Don't do this process alone because it's so hard to just be in your own head and try and figure it out. So, conversation is how I heal most of those things. And again, it's just that learned experience of doing it for many, many years, and also sort of listening to my own gut on what's the next right move for somebody.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important message about not doing it alone because I don't know, there's such a mantra out there and in our own minds that, it's failure if you're receiving help or whatever. I have never
I
felt that
hate
way.
it. I hate
Yeah.
it. Like, also, like, I have such beef with the whole self-made concept. Like, nobody is self-made.
Right.
And when we're doing like people idolize and fangirl or what have you, all of these creators and all these writers and all these movie producers, none of those people got to where they are on their own or by creating in isolation. So I often tell people you would be shocked at the number of hands that touch a book before it hits shelves. I
Hmm.
mean, probably 15, 20 people. And the majority of those people are getting support on the front end in the ideation process. And then they're getting support along the way. So it's not like someone sits down and writes a book and then goes, "Hey, does anyone want to publish this?" People are getting support, but you're right. There's an element of shame in
Yeah.
there. I shouldn't need help this early on. I should know how to do this. I should maybe just Google it. Don't do that either. Right? You're gonna leave with more answers than you started with, trust me. But I think, yeah, it's another sort of if we're getting just back to like the core humanity of it all, it's like nothing good happens alone. Like we're meant to create in community. And I love that part of it. It's why community is built in to everything that I do in my business,
Yeah.
whether it's free or whether it's a paid program. There's always going to be community because I've witnessed the benefits of just being with other people in creative energy. So it's really powerful.
Yeah. I mean, and it just it goes back to that idea of sharing yourself, right? Because that's what made people feel safe enough to I think when people like you that have had such an illustrious career and are rubbing shoulders with, really big people in the industry and people writing best-selling books and all of that kind of stuff, um, because of this ridiculous hierarchy that, we have that we live in this nation, and I speak to it in my trailer actually of this podcast, there's this sense like, oh, well, that person has made it.
Yeah.
So that's that.
As if there's just a destination also.
Yeah,
there's like a
exactly. Like they've
there's like
evolved.
the ribbon at the end that we just have to hit. No.
Yeah, it's not that. And yet we have that sense. And so then they see someone like you and they're like, well, okay, I can't, I mean, I don't want to share my dirty laundry. And so I think to your point, and if there's people listening that, whether you're a writer or not, but have your own business and are have this imposter syndrome which runs so rampant, you know, it we are, and I always say this, we're onions. Like we grow in layers, right? It's not a linear straight up. We're like this. We're going around in a sphere. And so being able to share who you are, like, no, I haven't arrived. Like, yeah, I might be further along on this journey than you are,
Yeah.
like, and I've got some a lot to offer you.
Yeah.
Everything that I've done.
I was actually having this conversation with my accountant of all people recently. because he works with a lot of different ranges of revenue and things like that. And we're talking about how authors always feel. And he published a book this year, and he said, it doesn't matter whether it's your first book or your 10th. I feel like everyone must struggle with the same thing. I go, believe it or not, they do. Yeah, sure, the writing and the formula comes easier, but they're still dealing with problems, and they're dealing with maybe even higher level problems. They have a lot to prove on their 10th book, 11th book. And he goes, it's the same in finance. He goes, I'm peeping into everyone's business. And whether you have a 6-figure year or an 8-figure year,
Yeah.
you have the same problems. They're just bigger and they're higher stakes. And so we got to stop looking around and feeling like everyone's figured it out but us.
It's the biggest it is the biggest obstacle, because that fear just I think it I mean, I talk about it like it's like walking with cement blocks on your feet. It
Hmm.
literally stops you in your tracks. And it's so fictitious because comparing your insides to someone else's outsides is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
I used to, I worked in my husband's business for a while. He was a financial advisor. And so I was a financial advisor for many years, in quotes. I mean, technically I was, but
God bless.
but my soul was
So,
not.
that is not easy work. Yeah.
I was really doing more marriage therapy in the sessions. But we would go to these big conferences, right? And big glitz, and people would be, making all the money and talking about all the things. And, I always used to be like, oh my God, they're so successful. And my husband would be like, yeah, I guarantee you. I guarantee you. Like, yeah, they may drive a Porsche, but how much money do you think they have in the bank?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like and who even cares, right? Is that even what it's about, what this human experience is about? And that's what I love about writing, and the books, particularly that you help birth, are so much about like, listen, guys, this is not what it's about. Like, this is not the meaning of life. This isn't why we're here.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I support my clients through is not just like what's the idea, but how do you bring yourself to this idea? So in book proposals, right? And for anyone listening who doesn't know what it is, it's that 70 to 90-page pitch document that gets you the agent and the publisher. And so it's really important. It carries a lot of weight, but a lot of people come to something that's substantial and scary for them, and they approach it like a robot. And
Mm.
that's the biggest miss. And so, a huge part of my job is to help people really bring themselves and their energy and their personality into what they're creating, because we've been told for so long, this is especially for women, to to button it up, to be a air quote professional, to do it like everyone else is doing it. Don't pave your own way. And so there's an unlearning that happens so that they can really be themselves. And once they read it out loud and read the permission that they've given themselves, it's like the floodgates open. Everything they write after that is so full of depth and humor and relatability and heartbreak. But it's not our natural state to show up that way. It really is both unlearning and then learning that it's okay to be yourself.
Yeah, so true. And on my card, it says teacher of unlearning.
Yeah.
It's literally, what that is. And I think, unfortunately, we've been taught to be men in dresses
Yeah.
and unfortunately for men, they've been taught to be men.
Yeah.
you know,
Yep.
it's not like, nobody is
It's
benefiting on this.
really fun for me when I work with men and I'm like, is that how you'd say it to like your friend, like over a whiskey? Or like, like it's like, again, like that pressure to be perceived a certain way, to have reached a certain level of expertise or, career trajectory, whatever it is. It's just as hard for so many men to try and be vulnerable on the page, truly. Um, which is why I loved that Parker, my client, who's a numbers guy, right, the accountant, um, he opened with a line about sex, and he was like, but like very vulnerably,
Which
and
men never talk about. Men
it
are
was
like,
hysterical.
never.
It
Yeah.
was hysterical, but I was like, immediately people are disarmed and they want to know, what is this person about? Right. You're creating again that connection and you're catching them off guard a little bit. But he was so vulnerable in his writing, and
Wow.
it was fun. He had a lot of fun once he got there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's amazing because it's true. Like guys, girls will talk about stuff, but guys, they don't talk about that stuff together.
Yeah. It was
Um,
about sex lives and bank accounts, and that, you know, they're the 2 topics that people are so deeply uncomfortable, but, like, the more we actually talk about things, the better we can get at it. So,
oh
it's
my God,
funny.
that's awesome. I
Yeah.
love that. I love that. Yeah. I mean, having been a couples therapist, those are the biggest things that come in sex and money
Abby, you've had
and
all the
kids.
roles. Look at you.
Yeah, I have. I need to write about them.
Coming soon.
Coming soon. Yeah. Um, so yeah, I mean, this is just such a rich conversation. And I'd love to hear about your personal journey with intuition and what are there any like decisions you've made? Oh, and here comes the hot flash, which is why I have my nice fan next to me. Yeah.
Understand.
Oh my God, I don't wish this on you. So, um, like, what do you have things in your life that you can look back on and say, "Oh yeah, I knew. I knew when I made this decision." Somewhere in hindsight, I can tell that I knew this was not the right thing. So my intuition was speaking, but I didn't follow it. Do you have experiences like that?
Yeah, I honestly, I'm a little bit late to the party, believe it or not, because I often have that realization after, like, the red flag has already been issued, and I go, "Oh, I kind of ignored my intuition there." So it is still a skill that I hone, but I think one of um the biggest things for me was actually in my leap from moving from California to New York.
Mhm.
And, I was in my late 20s. I had just bought a house in California. The timing didn't make sense at all. Um, my whole family is in California still. I was the first, bird to leave the nest. And I was presented with an opportunity to move here. And all the signs would have been like, don't do it. This isn't the time. But in my gut, I was like, I have to do it. I just know I have to do it. I didn't know a soul here, not a person. And I
Mhm.
moved across the country, sold everything, came here, and it has not disappointed. But it was such a big decision. And so when I would look at it on paper, it made 0 sense for
Yeah.
me to make this move. But in my gut, I was like, not only is it a yes, but actually this timing feels super good in my body. Like it feels really good to do this and take this adventure. Um, and now it's like I say to my friend who is just one of the most skilled manifestors you will ever meet, and I'm like, why don't I have that? Like I'm so I feel like I'm when I think about intuition, it's like how do I keep building trust with myself?
Yeah. Oh, I
That's
love
what I return to over and over again. And that's a area of growth. It's not again talking about finish lines, not something you just reach, but it's like how do I keep, building that trust with myself? How do I not disappoint myself? How do I say yes to adventure when it doesn't make sense? Like how do I keep growing as a human and listening to what my own needs are? I just started a year-long program with Mara Glatzel, who's a gem, if you don't know her, all about learning what our needs even are.
Mm.
Because a lot of times you hear about self care or, soul work or tending to ourselves, and people go, uh huh, uh huh, uh huh. But do you really know how to listen to yourself and what you need at any moment? That is a learned skill.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think I'm learning to trust my intuition more, but I'm phrasing it as trust. How do I keep building trust with myself?
It's a great way to phrase it. And it is such the crux of the issue, this whole idea of having a relationship with self. And I think that the industry has been, oh, self love, rah, rah, rah. And I always say, for people like bitches like me that came up, corporate mom and like, nah, you don't want to hear that stuff. And it's also a little misleading because, on this podcast, as the listeners know, I have a broad array of people. And many of them are communicating in other realms and the we go levels of consciousness go, and the idea of you know that what you are connecting with inside yourself is not about oh, I just need to love myself, because we do that from the mind. And that's why I recently spoke at an event and this guy said, before I came to this, if I hear the word resilience one more time, that I've been to so many of these and 95% of them I just walk right out of, because they're all talking about the same thing. Oh, love yourself, get a massage, get plenty of sleep, say nice things to yourself. But you can do all of that with your mind and it doesn't impact. That's what
Mhm.
the mind is not made for that. It has to sink lower, and it has to do with this very crux relationship with self. And we are so trained to seek my relationship with you. Well, what does Richelle think of me? What do you think? What I need to do what you want. And it goes so far deeper than, hey, just stop saying yes so much, just whatever. Like,
It goes back to that conversation of belonging,
yeah.
right? Because to listen to our own needs and to build that trust with ourselves might mean setting boundaries somewhere or leaving something or creating something. And again, that risks that innate need for belonging if we voice what's really coming up for us when that intuition grows. So I think it just keeps coming back to like, are we brave enough to both listen to ourselves and be ourselves?
Well, and can we hold ourselves in that moment? Because a lot, and this is why I gave a whole talk about stop setting boundaries, because I don't like that terminology,
Yeah.
because
Well, it's another word like self care. Like, what does that actually mean?
what does it mean? And like
Yeah.
setting a boundary means like, I'm going to put a fence up here. And that's not really what we're trying to
Right.
do. Having a boundary, something that's happening internally of me, I don't even have to say it. It's exuded, you know, and that's a different thing. But this idea of ooh, what did you say? I just had a thought. God, they just go away now. I don't know
The
where they
bravery to
go.
be ourselves. You said
This
hold ourselves.
yeah, we
Yeah.
have oh, well, hold ourselves, because one of the misconceptions I think that happens is like, well, if I say what I need, and this is where things tend to go from get surfacely digested. If I say what I need, that means that you should hear that and then you should do what you need to do. So when I'm working with someone, that is always a stage. They'll come back to me and they'll be like, "Well, I said what I need, and I told you they were going to do this, and that's what they did." And so, blah blah blah. I'm like, okay, well, that's a that is a diagnosable stage in the process of learning boundaries, because it's not about what the other person does, right? It's about, can you calm yourself down, and can you hold yourself, and can you deepen your connection with self in the face of someone not being okay with whatever your need is.
It's messy work.
It's
It's
messy.
messy.
Yeah.
And I think that it's another thing that we're trained to do is not be able to sit in discomfort.
Mm.
So to go through this evolution is to accept the messiness and be okay with that feeling.
And I wonder, I bet you see that a lot with your writers. Like, I can
Mhm.
imagine some meltdowns.
They want, like you said, they want the clarity right out of the gate.
Yeah.
They want everything to feel together, which is why the very first module of my program says this is always going to feel 70% done.
Mm.
Like, stop reaching for this benchmark that is 100% perfect. It's
Yeah.
never going to feel that way.
Yeah.
Even as you hand it in, the number of times that, we used to have to like yank manuscripts out of authors' hands because there's one more thing, one more round, one more read.
Oh,
You're always going to find something. I don't know, there's a lot of goodness in the good enough. But I
yeah.
think that, yeah, I think we want perfection. We want everything to feel clean. We want everything to feel right.
It's so true. I mean, I have literally, like, I've written a book in different voices, and now I'm trying to write the book again. And I go back to the book. I'm like, oh, this was so good, and then
Yeah.
but I write it and I'm like, oh, I love it. And then someone comes along and says, go write it more conversationally. So I scrap that, write it again. And with writing, you can work a sentence forever. I mean, you could
Oh yeah.
write,
And don't think just because I teach it, I'm immune. Talking about
yeah.
the whole evolution, like when I write something and someone reads it and it's someone dear to me and says, "Why are you being so coachy? Don't be so coachy." And I was like, "Oh, you're right. Like it is the way that I talk to people, but also there's a place for softness."
Yeah.
right? Like you don't always have to be, and that's another misconception about people who are writing or creating something that's in their expertise is like, you don't have to have all the answers.
Yeah.
The point is to be with people during their evolution, and you can guide them as gently or as firmly as feels natural to you, but also don't afraid to be in it with them because
Yeah.
it's just it's so easy to do to, and no one wants to read a book or take a program. It's like there's no space for what you think, only my way. That doesn't feel good to anybody. So we have to be with people in their mess and be transparent about our own mess.
Yeah, and be curious, have
Be
some
curious.
curiosity, yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things I really loved about your program was, the modules. I'll just make a plug for your program if there's people listening,
Thank
about
you.
the blueprint, that are interested in writing. But one of the things that I loved about the modules is that they were really simple. They were really short and simple, and it was like, "Do this," and I was like, "Okay, I can do that."
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
and then you move to the next thing and do that, right? And then there's these calls that you can get on for some more of the messy,
Yeah.
but there's always this really just positive, forward moving vibe, which I think is so important to calm the fear down, and just as I relate that more to maybe what other listeners are listening for and to, I mean, in life, we just have such a hard internal smackdown in our inner world. And I was just on a group last night and sharing. I have a group of young women and sharing, one of them was just in such intense pain around
Hmm.
her response to something or her reaction to something. And I mean, like, I could come up with like 5 examples on the spot. You know what I did at dinner on Saturday night with new friends? I bit my husband's head off. I have no idea why. I don't know if it was menopause or what. These were brand new people. Didn't know them, and so then what are you going to do? Are you going to beat yourself up over and stay in that fear place? Or are you going to plug into that connection with self,
Yeah.
the honoring of self, and then knowing at a deeper level who you are, even though your behavior might be ugly sometimes, because that's humanity, and love that part truly. And what's the next step? What's the next thing? Well, maybe I'll text him and be like, I don't know why I did that. I think you might have actually been right.
Sorry if that was uncomfortable.
you know, and I'm gonna blame it on menopause. Some
Yeah.
people tell me they're like freakishly angry at times. Anyway,
It
it
makes
was
sense
great
to
having you
me.
guys.
It makes sense to me. I would, when you talk about the modules, and I'm not bringing this specifically to talk about the program, but I think when you're teaching somebody something, you have to leave space for their evolution. And so when we're going through that book creation process, yeah, there's some. I want to give you parameters, but I don't want to tell you exactly what to do at every single step because then you're going to be fixated
Yeah.
on the right and the wrong
Ugh. Yes.
instead of just giving yourself space to figure it out. Right. So there's a reason those are simple. And it's funny. I had one woman, this program's been out for, I don't know, 4 years now, but I've only had one person go back and say the modules are too short.
No.
And I was like, there's a reason for that, right? Like you're being prompted to go create something, right?
Yeah.
Any longer and you'd be focused on, am I the A+ student? Am I checking all the boxes? Did I do every single step correctly? That's not the intention of that work. So yeah, I think that there's for coaches who are listening, like there's such strength in giving people that sort of safe net to land in some parameters, some nice walls. But within that, if they're hyper focused on right and wrong, they're not going to create what they want.
It's just such a great point. And hyper focused on right and wrong is, what the mind, that 10% of the neocortex that rules our world it is has a filing system. Good, bad, right, wrong. Everything goes right there. And so when we get identified with those thoughts, which so many, people are, then everything becomes a right and wrong, right? And then in our relationships, well, what you did is wrong. What I did is right. Oh, what I did is wrong. And then we're in a shame spiral. And
Yep.
it's so applicable, I think, to everything. And I was actually working in one of Terry Chespisio's classes a while back.
Love
And
Terry.
well, her brain is just unmatched.
Talk
And
about like snapping you out of whatever thought it is that you're telling
yeah,
yourself. Just brilliant at it.
yeah. And we were just, I was riffing on, what I was thinking. And she just puts words to it, right? She's like, yeah, what you're saying is there's no court of the world. And I was like, that is exactly what I'm saying. There is no court of the world. I say this all the time. There's no court of the world. There is no right and wrong. There is what is right for you. And that doesn't mean that you're trampling on anybody else. You don't even have to come out and say what's right for you. You can just embody that energy. You can just create that energy field around you and watch manifestation happen. Watch the right people come to you and the right things come to you.
Yeah. I mean, the self blame is a situation for creatives, especially. I mean, I see it a lot in the querying process, right? So, in trying to put your vulnerable work in front of someone who is judging it, and that is a sense of what it is, but they're deciding if it's right for them to represent or for them to publish it. But authors will say, I was rejected, which means this must be bad. This idea must be bad, or I
Right.
did something wrong. I didn't do it right. And that's not the case. Like in like many things, you're just looking for alignment. You're looking for the right aligned partner to bring this project to life with you,
Yeah.
to take that rejection as there's something wrong with me. And one of the most brilliant things that I heard a literary agent, Stephanie Tade, say on my podcast is she said, people need to learn to separate themselves from the work, like, meaning not to disassociate, but to say, if I'm getting feedback about this idea, it does not mean I am bad. It
Right.
doesn't mean I have failed. Maybe it means the idea needs a little bit more time, a little more touch, whatever it is, or it's just not right for that person. But to internalize that rejection is so hard,
Ugh. And so damaging,
so
right?
damaging.
That's the difference between guilt and shame. I made a mistake. I am a mistake.
Correct.
And it's so damaging. I have it makes me think of, because I mean I've been there, and I have this one rejection from Glennon Melton Doyle's uh agent,
Hmm.
I think it was, which, that was like just like, what the hell? I'll send it to her.
Let's
You know?
shoot the shot. Yeah.
But it was so nice. She said, a lot of these decisions are intuitive, and I'm gonna pass on this for someone who can, I'll never forget it, and undoubtedly will bring this to life or whatever. And instead of going into like, oh, it's another rejection, it's another, that and so many people didn't even respond and da 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 da. I was like, I gotta put that on my wall. That's
Yeah.
like I
Yeah.
gotta right. That's a celebration,
Yeah. And that's
you
someone
know.
saying, your idea has a lot of value. It's not the right fit for me. On the agent side, it's like, do I have too many competing titles on the list? Do I know how many editors to put this in front of? But there's a lot. Do I have personal interest in this to be in it with them for the next 2, 3 years? There's a lot of factors that go into those decisions, but it would be so easy for someone who doesn't have the sort
You
of
know.
training and tools that you have to say, I'm garbage. This idea is terrible. I failed at this. And to throw in the towel. And how many creative projects don't get brought to life because we quit because of something like that?
Yeah, yeah, totally. And how many, just to bring one last metaphor into play here before we close, how many times are we in an interaction with someone, and we personalize that interaction and we have no idea what that person is going through. We have no idea why they're really behaving the way they behave. This goes back to Byron Katie's work, like, is it really true? Oh, this person hates me. Is it true? I mean, I spent so much of my time, even if I would try and engage with someone that didn't want to work with me, it was like, oh my God, they hate me. That must be why.
Yeah.
That must be, whatever. Or just the person on the freeway, right? That gives you the finger, or the person in the store or whatever. And it's like, I can't believe they did that. I would never do that. And I'm always like, well, you might do that.
Yeah.
Like,
That could also be that person's worst day. Like, you just don't know.
you just don't know. We don't need to personalize all those things. Yeah.
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 Oh, all these lessons in being human, you know?
Exactly. All these doesn't being human, and writing is such a wonderful vehicle for working through that. And and I know that's such your passion. So um I want to give one more plug for the blueprint if anybody's looking to do that. It's really just such a wonderful program. And I don't know if this episode's going to be out in time, but I know you're also doing something else that you wanted to
Oh,
share.
yeah. Book to Brand is on March 7th. It's an event I do with Farnoosh Torabi, who's a four-time author. And we come together and bring just an intimate gathering of aspiring writers, no matter where they are in the process, from just having a butt of an idea to having a finished proposal, what have you. But we bring people together with industry experts. So it's something that we do every year. So if this is airing after March 7th, you can put your name on the wait list to hear more for the next one. But it's really about providing access because that's a huge mission of mine in my business, in my podcast, in this event is like, how do we take down the velvet rope, air quotes,
Mm.
to this industry and just really help people get to where they want to go? So we have publishers from major publishers, editors, literary agents, and authors come speak and make connections, and it's yummy, and it's a great opportunity if that's on your bucket list for this year or next. So thank you.
Awesome. And I'll have all the links to how to reach Rochelle and all that stuff in the show notes. What would you like to leave people with as it relates to intuition and fear, whether it's writing, whether it's your own human journey? What do you most want people to know?
Mm, I'm actually going to steal from a former client of mine, Tara Stiles, because it's a quote that she said on my podcast that I repeat all the time. And that's if you feel the pull within you, then you have to honor it and bring it to life because you are the vessel to do it. It wouldn't be in you, it wouldn't be on your heart if it wasn't your assignment to
Mm.
bring it to life. So to not get in your brain and talk yourself out of it. Like, listen to the pull, listen to the tug, and start working on it because, I mean, the world needs more stories, needs more experiences, needs more belonging. Um, so I hope that people will take that tug seriously.
I love it. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. This is great.